Then it looks like you can work on it.
And I'll start off saying, first of all, I'm really glad to be back here with everybody. This is kind of a homecoming for me. I actually got my start as an IT person when I was really young. I had my own IT company in the early 90s, probably around 2000s when I made a transition, started transitioning to digital forensics. And so I'm a digital forensics expert, or at least the attorneys declare me that when they're putting elements. And I'm also a certified fraud examiner, so I do a lot of work with white-collar crime embezzlement. A lot of times, the interactions that I have with you might be because of employee misconduct, things like that. I do a lot of theft of IP, stuff like that.
Not me.
Not you directly. Exactly. But I'm glad to be here with you guys. Like I said, it's awesome to be a room full of IT people. And we all know that once you're an IT person, no matter what, you are always an IT person. A lot of groups about it. And I'm actually excited to be here with you guys this evening because I think some of the things we talk about are going to be stuff you guys are going to be more in touch with. So that's fun. So this is me, and if I can actually work a clicker. All right. So to get us started, and last time I used this, they made me read it out loud, so I'm going to read it out loud. So Death and Pig are sitting in the bar, or Death and Mouse are sitting in the bar. And Mouse says, "What are you up to, Mr. Death?" Death says, "I was supposed to meet Pig here, but he hasn't arrived. Hang on while I voice dial him. Call Pig. Home or mobile? Call Pig home." And then Pig drops dead. And Death says, "Perhaps I worded that for you." Okay. So the topic is death, and hopefully it won't be as bad and depressing as the topic of death could be. And it's also a topic that a lot of people often avoid, but that's a lot of what we're going to be talking about this evening. And part of the focus is going to be not only on how me as an investigator, a forensic investigator, has to handle these type of investigations or trying to help people out when they're in these situations. But what I want you to take away also is, oh my gosh, there are things that I need to do myself, things I can do better, and things that I haven't thought about when I'm in that position. So how many people here, let's just kind of get an idea, how many people here have been in the position, we'll say personally, of having to deal with someone else's estate, either a friend or a family member or something like that? Exactly. And then how many people have had to do it perhaps from a professional level, like it's come up in your work or you've been involved in that somehow in your work? Okay. And again, I'm sorry that any of you have to deal with that. And it's true that a few of us are as lucky or as unlucky, as the case may be, to kind of know the exact moment, the time and the place. We rarely are in the situation where you know when it's going to happen. And I think part of that leads to us not adequately preparing for it, okay? And the situation, for example, a couple years back, it was a beautiful June afternoon in Louisiana outside of Baton Rouge. There was this lady, her name was Christine. She was a realtor. Wonderful lady, she's in her early 50s. She was having a great day. She was having an absolutely wonderful day. She was driving on the interstate in a almost brand new Mercedes that she had bought, sort of a little sports car that she bought to reward herself, bright red Mercedes sports car. She was talking on the phone with one of her associate realtors, and they were talking about what a great day it was. They'd had some closings, some showings, things were going well, everything's great. And when she got up that morning, I am sure that she never expected or thought about the truck in the other lane. And the truck driver, who shouldn't have been driving the truck. In fact, his trucking company knew it. He should have had his license taken away a long time ago. And he went to change lanes without looking, and the front corner of his truck struck the back corner of her car, spun her car out of control. And 99 times out of 10, her car would have ended up in the median. That would have been the end of it in another fender bender. But when her car spun out of control, it struck a dump truck illegally parked in the median. The only thing in the median for miles in either direction. A split second either way. Again, it would have been just a regular fender bender. She died instantly at the scene. Her coworker had been on the phone with her, heard something horrible happen, the woman dead, was frantically trying to call back to find out what happened. At the scene, the police had two witnesses. One witness said her car got hit by a truck, and she spun out of control in the dump truck. The other witness, a truck driver who had parked his truck about a half a mile down the road and walked back, told the police that she was on her cell phone at the time. She was on her cell phone, she drifted off the side of the road, she hit the dump truck. So as these things do, lawyers got involved, and this amazing lawyer from Baton Rouge, LSU lawyer, son of Louisiana, walked right off the pages of a John Grisham novel. Like whatever you have in your head right now is it. This guy, the same, like when he first called me on the phone, I thought I was listening to Michael Beck read the audiobook, if you guys remember the John Grisham stuff. And he started looking into it, went to the scene, looked at stuff. Two competing narratives, sees the yellow paint transfer on the back of her car, says, well, I need to really talk to this truck driver who said she was on her cell phone. Goes to find the truck driver who drives a bright yellow truck. The truck driver disappeared, actually. Took off. That was a whole long story trying to track him down. But anyway, point being, the insurance companies, and lawyers for the dump truck and for the trucking company, they had a story. Regardless of how ridiculous it might sound now, as I'm telling you all this evidence we have, it doesn't matter. They had a witness, even though they couldn't find their witness, that said she was on her cell phone. Well, luckily, at the time of the crash, or right after the crash, because they knew litigation was going to be coming at some point, her cell phone was taken, it was sealed up, stuck in a safe deposit box, and lawyers fought and argued for about a year and a half to figure out how we were going to look at the data on our cell phone and how we were going to do an inspection and all this kind of stuff. Well, it was about a year and a half later, it was kind of early spring. I went to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, went to this lawyer's office. There was another forensic expert for the trucking company. There were all these lawyers in this room, and we were there to make a copy of so that I could do an inspection of her cell phone. Well, one of the things that we did is we'd ask the family. She had an iPhone. Does anybody know her passcode? Does anybody know how to get into her phone? We don't know what her passcode is. We didn't know her passcode. And they gave me like her anniversary, her kids' birthdays, things like that, gave us some of that stuff. And I was like, this is not going to be good. But flew to Baton Rouge, got in there with the lawyers, went through all the rigmarole, took the phone out. Of course, we had to charge it up. And if an iPhone's been sitting for a long time, it takes a while. And you sit there, and then a little battery thing comes up, and charging thing comes up, and we waited, and I knew that this was going to, a couple tries, get back in the car, drive back to the airport, fly. After probably about longest 15 minutes, the phone opened up. This is the actual picture, by the way. And I didn't know when I took the picture that I'd be using it. This is the actual picture. There was no passcode. And I've given this talk a couple times, and I still get chills. Her last gift to her family was that the phone didn't have lock code. Okay. And I know I'm sitting in a room full of IT security people, and I'm not saying don't have a lock code on your phone. We're going to talk more about that in a little bit. But in this situation, the phone opened right up. Okay. Well, what did that do for me? Okay. Well, it meant that I could make a copy of the phone. I could do an investigation. I could put to rest some of the questions about whether she was culpable in her own death. She was not, we knew she was on her phone, but she wasn't also using apps. She wasn't texting at that time. I was able to look at the Bluetooth stuff and show that she had been connected to the Bluetooth of her Mercedes. It had a really nice hands-free system. So she was doing it exactly like she was supposed to. Because of that, we were able to get over the hurdles with the insurance companies. We were able to make sure everybody settled. This also contributed to the criminal charges against the driver of the truck, who ironically, the charges for making the false statement and then running from the lawyers was worse than the killing somebody on the interstate. But you take your victories where you can get them. What else did it let me do? Well, in this particular case, and this is her with her daughters. Her daughter had actually gotten married a couple months before that, and there were still pictures from the wedding on her phone that they had not had. We were able to retrieve that. We were able to, she was one of those people that like to do voice memos for people, like, hey, you're doing so great, have a great day at school. And to year and a half, 2 years later, to be able to give to the family those recordings of her own voice was also very powerful. So again, that's what that meant in that case, okay? Where someone was deceased, we were able to get into their data, we were able to reconstruct something that helped out their family or whatever the situation was. That's one example. Another example, we're going to get all the examples out of the way early, don't worry. Another example is the woman whose husband was a partner in like this engineering firm. And they had an agreement that when one of the partners died, they would get residual income from the people who were their clients and stuff. This normal situation like that. Well, strangely, after he died, there was no residual income because apparently he never had any clients, according to the company, right, who refused to provide any documentation or information and turn into this big legal battle. But what we were able to do is to reconstruct his business footprint from only having his personal devices and stuff. So we had to go through his personal phone and find out who his contacts were, show these were people he was talking to on a regular basis through text messages and phone calls, look at, personal emails and stuff like that to show that, so that ultimately they would come around and she was able to get entitled to that compensation. Kind of broke the floodgates there. Another situation, you have a gentleman who actually worked for a tech company, had a serious drinking problem. I'm not saying those two go together. It impacted his health. His health was really bad. His job performance was bad. He got terminated from his company. When he got terminated from the company, he had a life insurance policy that would cover him for 30 days, almost like the COBRA stuff. This is 30 days. His body was found about 36 hours after the midnight where the policy would have expired. Okay? The coroner looked at it and said, yes, based on the condition of the body, he does look like he was dead for more than 36 hours. So that helped us. Insurance company wasn't so happy. So the attorneys are like, Derek, can you look at his electronic footprint? Let's see what's going on. He had a desktop Mac computer. He had a phone. We looked at both of those. We were able to see that, let's just say around 6 o'clock on the evening where the policy would have expired was the last message he'd sent to anybody. And let's just say this, his kids who were older teenage kids, he was divorced, they were older teenage kids, because of his medical problems, because they were kind of used to him being out of touch sometimes for days. So it wasn't until like the second day where they'd not heard anything that they had him checked up on. But so like around 6 o'clock that night was when the last actual messages and activity was. And when we looked at his computer, what we saw is, okay, say a little after 6 o'clock, he's doing stuff on the computer, there's web traffic, there's this, there's messaging, and then the computer goes to sleep. About 30 minutes later, the computer wakes up because the data on the Mac said there was a mouse movement. Mouse jiggle, okay? You guys are IT guys, that's why I love giving this talk to you. You guys are right there with me. I don't have to put the pictures on the bottom shelves. His body was found on the floor next to his desk. Okay? Putting all that evidence together, my testimony was that he was working on the computer, he passed out at his desk. The computer went to sleep. When he actually died, he fell out of the chair and onto the floor, caused a vibration with the mouse. After some back and forth, the insurance company agreed. They paid out the life insurance policy. That's what's sending his kids to college. That's why it's important. Okay. And let's say one more quick one. Guy owns a construction company. He's sitting at his computer in his house. It's about 2 o'clock in the morning. He's working on the computer. It's raining, really noisy outside. According to the police report, he gets up from his computer. He goes outside to his driveway in the pouring rain and shoots himself dead in his driveway, commits suicide with his own gun. and he had kids. So this was the official police report. Lawyers, everybody, we could not get them to reopen this. That was it. And as we'll talk about later, a lot of times the simplest narrative is the one that they want. Move it on, close it, move on. Looking at his electronic footprint, looking at his computer, looking at his phone, we found a couple of things. One, what he was actually doing on his computer at 2 o'clock in the morning was buying tickets for the state fair to take his kids the next day. And there were messages where he was concerned that some people who he had fired from the construction company, but he kept his trucks parked in his yard, were trying to steal some of his tools. And as we started putting pieces together, and some questionable testimony from other people, was that he heard something outside, walked outside, got in a struggle with somebody who was trying to break into his truck. He inadvertently got shot. They took off. The key is we were never going to get the police to reopen the investigation. But for that family, it's still a tragedy, but the difference, and that's something that I run into a lot. So what we're talking about today, and hopefully that's the worst it gets for you guys for what I'm going to throw on you. But what we're talking about today is we're talking about digital legacy. And we're going to talk about death from an investigator standpoint, how I have to deal with it, and kind of making you be cognizant of it and think about how this stuff works. Sources of data, and again, IT guys, you're going to be on the same page with me about sources of data, what we have to do to collect data, legal considerations. Then we're going to talk about things that you can do to prepare yourself or your family members for when that time comes for you. And again, it's all not going to be dark and depressing. We're going to get past that. And then we're also going to talk about storing data for the long term and storing data methods and methodologies, which I'm also excited about considering who the audience is today, because you guys are going to be, like I said, on the same page with me for that. So when we talk about digital legacy, what are we talking about? Well, we're talking about all that electronic stuff that makes up who you are. Your online persona, everything, not just Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and stuff you think about, but all that other stuff that shows you were here. Your photo galleries, do you have a shop on Etsy? All those things that make who you are and the fact that you were here, right? We all have that. And a lot of times we kind of take that for granted, but it's important because it's a part of who you are. We talk about, obviously, crypto wallets, Steam libraries, stock trading, things like that. We're going to talk in a minute about why that's important. We do a lot with families because of the opioid crisis. And it is, I will say, from my perspective, is every bit as bad as what you hear, something law enforcement deals with. Unfortunately, your average law enforcement officer has dealt with so many overdoses that they have kind of become a bit desensitized to it from the standpoint of if somebody's died of a drug overdose, it's a suicide, intentional or accidental, end of story. There's no other questions to be asked, move on. And that's not enough for the family a lot of times. Was it accidental? Was it intentional? Did somebody give them bad stuff? Did they have a disagreement with somebody and they get poisoned? Those are the kind of questions that sometimes they come to us to try to ask. And I don't want to say it's funny, but it's also interesting that sometimes we'll have family members come to us who have had family members pass away, and they're really, really interested in getting the family pictures. They're really, really interested in reading the messages. They're really, really interested in, the kind of closure. And then after we kind of go around about it for a while, well, they may have had a Bitcoin wallet, or they might have had some crypto, or we think they were into this, and then you're like, okay, I understand that that's also, important, but sometimes that's what they do. So again, in general, we're talking about all those things that are electronic that show you're here. Okay. The good news is that there's starting to be more recognition of that. And there is actually, you can go online. This is just one Digital Legacy Association where you can have the equivalent of a digital living will. And I know some of you are going, this sounds crazy. And I'm saying, okay, what do you want to happen to your Facebook page when you die? Do you want it to still be there? Do you want it to be, Facebook has a thing where you can memorialize it. So you say this person is deceased and there's no new posts, but people can comment and stuff like that. That's a consideration. I had a friend who told me one time, he said, look, If you ever hear that I've been taken to the hospital, you don't go to the hospital. If I don't make it, the laptop doesn't make it. Do you understand? Perfectly clear. I understand. I recently had a case where 2 people were deceased, and they put in their will that the beneficiaries could not receive any of the estate unless all the electronic devices were destroyed. Okay? Well, and some of you go, hey, that's a pretty good idea. Well, the problem was there was some outstanding legal questions. There were some issues that we needed that evidence to figure out. And so kind of the same people that it would help were also the same people who were standing in their way. So again, there's help out there, search for it. There's interesting things that you can do that. The main thing with anything else, you kind of talk to your family, kind of let them know what you think. And I would say talking about the Facebook thing, there's no set answer. Can't tell you what to do or whatever. Or when it happens to a family member. I will say, from my perspective, let's say somebody's passed away 3, 4, 5, 6 months, okay? And for whatever reason, I've been charged to go in and download and preserve a copy of their Facebook account, which requires me to log into their Facebook account. And then all of a sudden, people start popping up on Messenger. Hey, I haven't talked to you in a while. Hey, how are you doing? What's going on? Yeah, so you should never have to find out that somebody has passed away through Facebook Messenger. Again, things to think about, no easy answers. All right, so.
One other thing,
Yes.
it's also true that some of the lawyers that are doing the estate planning now are also covering that aspect as part of your engagement.
And I appreciate that. I appreciate that there's starting to be more of a recognition of it. And again, this is such a topic that nobody wants to talk about, so I'm glad we're here talking about it, and it's going to get better as we go on, I promise. So thinking about it from me as an investigator, but also thinking about it because there may become a time where in the course of your job, you are asked to, maybe you have an employee that has passed away and you have to figure out what their footprint was or recover some of their data. Richard and I were talking earlier about the fact that there's a lot of companies out there that have life insurance policies on their executives, but they do not have continuity plans that actually spell out, here's what we're going to do if they get hit by a truck, because that seems a little bit morbid, and I don't want to talk about that, but it's very important, especially when you're talking about small businesses. A lot of small businesses, one of the principals dies suddenly, and that's it, because a lot of times it's because you don't have access to the information, you don't have access to the things they know. So from my standpoint, sometimes it's suspect, victim, or witness that I'm trying to collect information from, reconstruct their footprint. So, what might it be for? Now, sometimes it's financial information. Obviously, that's usually the big thing. Sometimes it's very important because you're trying to find where bank accounts are. You're trying to find whether they had crypto. You're trying to determine, whether there's stocks or things like that. But other times, when somebody passes away suddenly, it's just about keeping the power on. It's just about paying the car payment. And this isn't a bad thing, but in a lot of marriage situations, there's one person who, it's division of labor. There's one person that pays all the bills, and the other person does other stuff, and the other stuff person might have no clue how to handle all that stuff. And most of the data that you need for that, because let's face it, we all do electronic statements, it may be locked inside, somebody's email account. So again, as we go on, we're going to talk about that. So if I'm in a situation, or you're in a situation where you're trying to reconstruct somebody's electronic footprint, be it because it's a personal thing or it's a job thing, first question, of course, is do you have some type of authorization, right? Are you the executor? Are you working on behalf of law enforcement? Do you have a court order, or are you working on behalf of the family, right? And you're like, okay, that's all logical there. This all makes sense because I'm probably one of these or helping one of these. The problem comes in is that you can have all 4 of these, and they're all conflicting, and they all have conflicting agendas. There are many situations where, as we touched on before, you might be trying to conduct an investigation to find out what happened to a person. Maybe they died under mysterious circumstances, were they killed? Was it suicide? What happened? The guy who's found shot dead in his car, and his brother and his girlfriend flee the country, and the police call it suicide, but we believe there were messages that showed that he was called to that spot, right? The same people who might know are the ones that are standing in your way. Family members may not want you to conduct an investigation because you're going to find out other stuff. Raise your hand if your family has no skeletons in their closets. But that's an important thing. So again, these are all considerations. I'm not saying I'm giving you all the answers. I want you to be thinking, okay? And one of the other things is, what about an investigation where somebody's going to die, right? Think about that. And I know you're going, well, what do you mean? Well, think about the tobacco litigation. We had so many plaintiffs in the tobacco litigation who knew they'd never make it to court. And speaking of a subject for a John Grisham novel, right? And so they were taking video depositions and getting their testimony down. And I would say this, I hope you'll never be in that situation, but if you've ever got to talk to somebody about getting a statement from them before they die, the sooner the better. It's a conversation you don't want to have. It's not something you want to talk about. But just remember, the longer you go on, the more difficult it may be to accurately convey that information. As an aside, it's always great to take the video camera, have grandma, grandpa, great-grandma, great-grandpa telling their stories and stuff. Everybody wants to do it. People forget about it. That's something you can do as well. I know I'm throwing a lot at you, but so you or I, you as an individual, you as an IT person, me, right? We have somebody who's died. We're going to assume we're starting from zero. We've got nothing, right? No passwords, no nothing. We're starting from zero. How do we reconstruct this person's life, either to find out whether they were killed or some other nefarious thing happened, or to help the family pay the bills, get closure, get the family pictures, do that kind of stuff? Well, obviously we talked about insurer authorization, kind of make sure you're working on behalf of somebody, obviously. Start with the phone, right? Phone's a holy grail. I used to say that, your phone is like your diary. And then somebody said, oh no, you lie to your diary. Like, okay. And I actually found myself one time saying that, you can lie to a judge, you can lie to a doctor, don't lie to the guy that's holding your cell phone. And then what happens is it's running a special operating system that tries to brute force the phone, but it tricks the phone into the number of tries. So it doesn't wipe after 10 tries because the phone doesn't know that you're trying. And you'll go into police evidence lockups. Once they inject the bootloader, all they got to do is keep the phone plugged in. And you'll see rows of dozens and dozens and dozens of phones all plugged into like power strips with chargers snaked everywhere. And every morning somebody walks in, and if a phone has hit, the screen will kind of pop up and say, boom, we got the passcode. But again, it can take hours, it can take months. In some cases, depending upon the complexity, it can take years. So that's not a guarantee. Now, knowing that we can pay $4,000, $5,000, $6,000, send it to a lab, and they can crack into it in a year, isn't going to help you get the information to get the mortgage paid. Okay. So hopefully we have access to the phone. Do we have a passcode? Can we break in? If not, are there some passcode options? For example, birthdays, anniversary dates. What is somebody's PIN code for their ATM machine? A lot of times that's the same, right? If not, can we access the iCloud? Sometimes our options for getting into the iCloud are better than the options for the phone. Hopefully somebody's phone's backing up. We have ways to get into the iCloud. We'll talk a little bit more in detail about this. So that's the phone. The phone's important. Of course, why is the phone important too? Because most of your other authentications, your two-step authentication that I don't have to explain to you guys, most of those would go to that phone. In fact, in some situations, if we're doing an investigation, we have the phone that's locked, we can't get into it, take a SIM card out, pop it into another phone, at least we can get text messages. Won't make it a trusted device through Apple, but at least we can get text messages. I know you guys remember, it used to be there was a time when your text messages would pop up on the screen. So the phone was locked, but we could get that Google code, we could get that other code up on the screen. You can't do that now. So the computer, let's say we have a computer. Is it encrypted? It's not encrypted. Can we break in? Well, you guys probably all know this, but if you can log into a computer using the password, that gives you access to all the Safari or Chrome or Edge saved passwords, which can be valuable. If we just pull the drive and pull the data, we get the data, but we don't get those passwords, which can be very valuable. And you could have a situation too where a computer is maybe still logged into something with just enough time, for you to change a password or add another trusted number or something. So these are kind of the steps, with the ultimate goal of getting into the primary email account, right? Because if you can get into the primary email account, then you've got everything, right? Banking, you can get password resets. You can see where people had accounts, because there's going to be email receipts and stuff like that. There's going to be all that stuff. Now, what can you do to your own stuff? Well, maybe put all the bills in one folder. Maybe make a rule that every month when that bill statement comes in from this bank or that bank, it goes in the subfolder that says bills, things like that. So this is kind of our step, right? Information that we might be looking for that's helpful, okay? Again, bills, bank accounts. We've had to go through people's electronic footprints just to see if we can find copies of wills. Maybe they don't have a printed copy, they don't have an executed copy, but maybe I have found more stuff in people's notes on their phones, in the Notes app, letters to other people, apologies and stuff like that in suicides. We found wills and people who have dropped dead, but we found their wishes in the Notes app on their phone. Even stuff like, burn me, stick me in a field and plant a tree in me, those kind of things that are also important to know that maybe they didn't get around to telling their family. And of course, just sometimes it's about the closure to the family, recovering that information that they wouldn't have. Social media data. Facebook. Why is Facebook important? Well, if somebody dies under mysterious circumstances or has a lot of open-ended business that you need to help them close, Facebook is one way to know who they've been talking to. That's to know who they've been communicating with. From law enforcement standpoint, if you're trying to catch a criminal or see what they're up to, that's another way to know who they're accessing. Again, we talk about value accounts. I love that I don't have to explain what a Steam account is, right?
I need to
But how many games do you have in your Steam account?
All of them.
All of them. I know, right? I share one with my daughter. She's got the humble bundle thing. She keeps giving me updates as we pass 800 and 900 game milestones. But my point is, let me ask you this. How much value, and this is a great thing to ask this question, how much value do you have tied up in your Steam account, right? That is an asset. That is something important. That is something that you would want somebody else to have access to, along with other sources of cloud data, other sources of documents. And again, we're talking about things that you might be storing data or you may have value in, your family knows nothing about, and you've never even thought about the fact that it could be important for them. And then, of course, we talk about legacy data. We'll talk more about that in a little bit, but all those things that make you, the pictures, your email, writing. Most people have like digital art nowadays. Those things are important. And you just don't want that to just go away. And again, we'll talk more about it in a second, but things that don't seem so important to you are going to be very important to your family and way, way important to your kids. Okay? So, best practices. Again, this is the sad, scary part, but share your main credentials or lock code. I'm not saying don't put a lock code on your phone, but, share it. Have a friend or family member that you share passwords with. Send an email and say, hey, if anything ever happens to me, here's what you need to know, right? I know there's a lot of people out there that are saying, my spouse is the last person that I would want to have to share my passcode with, so I'm going to give you an out. And the out is, well, listen to me. What happens if we're on that same plane together? We need to share our passcodes with somebody else, not each other, because we could both go at the same time. So if you need that out, you've got that out. But again, and keep it simple, right? Again, this is a great audience for this because you're the ones that make 14-digit, uppercase, lowercase, special character that can't be a question mark or an exclamation point, and you have to change it every 30 days, right? But you all know what they do when you make them do that. And when I go in somewhere and I have to seize computers, because I go in with law enforcement and we collect it all, and what do? Not only do I take pictures before I collect everything, I get all the Post-it notes off the side of the monitor where they wrote down what their password was because it was too complex. And the point is, you can have passwords, but when you're talking about your personal stuff, you don't have to go crazy with it. Again, especially if you're going to hope that somebody else will be able to access your stuff, like a spouse. Again, one of the other reasons why a spouse is probably not the best idea is because you will give that information to them, something horrible will happen to you, and they're going, oh, he told me, but I can't think about it right now because there's so many other things. So having a friend or family or whatever, an interesting thing about that too, your cell phone, right? There's a lot of families that have a bunch of cell phones, and there's only one person who's the authorized user, right? If you don't want to add your spouse as an authorized, just call and put their name on there. Have a friend, put their name on that. When you're talking about email accounts and your primary email accounts and the recovery for it, well, and again, this is a great group for this. If you've had a Gmail account for a long time, when you first set it up, it may have never asked you to do recovery options. Now, if you have one, you probably have to set it. But there's still a lot of people out there that have Gmail accounts that do not have a phone number or an email address as a recovery set for it. And I'm telling you right now, if you don't have recovery information for your Gmail account and you get locked out of it, it's not yours, it's gone. Gmail's not going to help you at all. You're toast. Which also brings up the important point is that the people you think would help you if you're dealing with one of these situations are not going to help you. The Apple Store is not going to help you. Apple is not going to help you. Google is not going to help you. Microsoft is not going to help you. And in fact, they can make it worse. You contact Google and you say, hey, so-and-so died, and I'm trying to get into their email account. There's a flag that's going to go on that account. They're going to drop a hammer down. Drop the steel walls or iron walls down on it, whatever you say. And that's it, right? And that's unfortunate. Why? Well, starting back after the Gulf War, a lot of servicemen were going overseas. Electronic information, it was kind of the first time where, servicemen were overseas emailing home during the war, right? And so a lot of servicemen had email accounts. A lot of servicemen died. Families would try to get into the email accounts, and Yahoo and all these other people wouldn't help. Well, there was a lot of lawsuits, and unfortunately, the courts went both ways. Some courts sided with the rights holder. So what is Google's opinion about your Gmail account? Their opinion is you don't own that. They have licensed that address to you and just you. And when you die, that doesn't transfer to somebody else. That email address was given to you. That's yours. When you die, it's gone, right? Which is why they don't want to help you. Other courts have ruled, and courts have sided with them, other courts have said, well, somebody's email data is akin to their personal papers. It's the same as if, during the Revolutionary War, the letters that they would write back and forth and keep in an old drawer, it was akin to that, and it's somebody's personal papers. Problem is, you can't rely on that. So here's another trick. Make sure you have recovery options, but you can set multiple email addresses. You can set multiple phone numbers. You can go in and put your spouse's phone number. You can go in and put a friend's phone number as also one of the password recovery options. So if something happens to you and somebody goes and that happens all the time when we're doing an investigation. I look at somebody's Gmail account. We don't have the password. I look at the recovery options. Who do you know's last two digits of their phone number is like 75? I'm asking the family, who is this? And I'm like, oh, that's my son or my nephew or whatever. And you go from there. Again, all these things to think about. And again, it applies to all that. All right? Finally, try to think in terms of what what your coworkers might need, your employees, your bosses, whatever might need if something happened to you. And the reason why I snickered, it's not funny, but I know other people will be like, dude, if I got hit by a truck, this place can burn to the ground for all I know. That's the last thing I'm worried about. However, if somewhere down in your little Grinch heart you do care, try to make sure that there is some sense of continuity so that if something did happen to you, that the people that you work with could carry on. We call it the hit by a truck thing. And actually, I used to use the joke back in my IT days was, if your IT guy got hit by a truck, what would you do? Do you have any passwords or things written in? Do you know any of this stuff? And again, you have to keep that in mind because unfortunately it happens. All right. Again, Google even has something called an inactive account notification. You can go in your Google account and you can say, basically, if I don't log into my Google account in 30 days or 60 days or whatever, they will send a link to whoever you specify that they can click on and get back into your account. So they have come a long way since that early part of it. Still not a guarantee. Again, we talked about adding an authorized user to your cell phone account and have the conversation with friends and family about your footprint and your documents and your data the same way you would talk about them about the other stuff. So this is a good spot, I guess, because I've thrown a lot at you. We don't have a lot of time. I tell people when people ask me to talk, I say the trick isn't getting me to talk, the trick's getting me to shut up. So, for this first part here, any questions, any thoughts, comments? Hopefully, yes.
I know there's a lot of password managers out there. I'm not asking you to endorse or to kick back, but like one password, or there's some others out there that help maybe less technical grandparents or somebody organize their stuff in one place. That way they just have one thing they have to give over, not 28 different things.
Well, and LastPass, things like that, those are good. People use those. I sometimes worry about the added level of complexity. I like how, Apple phones, Samsung phones, they have their own built-in password managers. They work really good. I joke about the fact that I'm arguably one of the top cell phone security people in the country, and it was only recent that I put a passcode on my own phone because I'm kind of lazy. Now, I would have said it so my family could access my stuff, but I actually ended up putting a passcode on my phone only because that's the only way it would store all my other passwords, and I was lazy. But the funny thing was, as soon as I put a passcode on my phone, everybody in my family knows what my passcode is. My mother knows exactly, it's the same thing I've used my whole life, so, it's fine. But, letting the browser store passwords. One of the things we used to say, too, is as far as passwords go, you have one high security password that you use for like the banking and the email, and then another password that you just use for, all these silly websites, weather.com or whatever, which kind of decreases your risk when there are breaches and stuff like that. However, in this day and age, you should all be using two-step authentication whenever it's available. And so it really comes down to making sure they can get in the phone. And again, that's why one of our strategies is, if something happens to a loved one or somebody's estate, keep service on the phone. Because once you lose that phone number, you can't have the service disconnected and then say, hey, we want to get this number back. For security reasons, it doesn't work that way. You can't go down and demand a specific number. So make sure you keep service on the phone as long as you need to, because again, you can always pop the SIM card out, pop it in another card, and at least, and in fact, you've seen where some places they will send you a code or they will call you. That is just so wonderful when you have that option, because for people like me doing what I'm doing, it's really helpful if you just get a phone call and they speak it out to you. You don't have to get a phone call. All right. So, again, we talked about act as quickly as you can. Don't try to force it. It's better to try the password reset options than just keep trying wrong passwords, because if you try the wrong password too long, as you all guys know and y'all have programmed in, it will shut it down and lock it up and you can't get in at all. Okay? Start with a main email account. it is amazing to me how many people have all these different email accounts they use for different things. That would drive me nuts. Luckily, my work account, my personal account can be the same. For most of you, it's not. But at least, well, I still have my Yahoo account, I have a Gmail account, I have another account that came from Time Warner Spectrum that I use for this other thing. So at least make sure you got one. And if you're going to have multiple accounts, have them cross-authenticate. Have the Yahoo send the recovery to the Gmail, have the Gmail send the recovery to Yahoo, so if something happens to get locked out, at least you can get into one or the other and they can open each other. And like we said, swapping the SIM card. Be sensitive about social media accounts. For people like me, when I'm doing a death investigation, I'm going in and trying to collect as much information as I can because A, it's volatile. It may not be there long. I've got to get as much as I can, as quick as I can, and then I don't know what may be important later. Again, don't be afraid to get help from either people like me or other IT people. But Apple's not going to help you. Google's not going to help you. Microsoft is not going to help you, and that's frustrating. So here we go. Now we can get to kind of the less crazy part. I know we're getting past our time, so we're going to kind of run through this real quick. Yes.
What about just having the backup utilities to the cloud?
Well, okay, backing your phone up is good because if I can access that backup, I would get your data, your family pictures, stuff like that. But if I'm trying to get back into the banking, I'm trying to get into all this other stuff, I need that live working phone because that's where the codes are going, that's where the emails are going. There may be apps that you're using or they were using that you need Robinhood, things. There may be stuff like that you can only access through the app or through that device, which is a trusted device. So while you can get a lot of static data, there's nothing is as good as having that actual working phone when you're trying to recreate somebody's footprint. And let me also say, if you die tomorrow, the last thing your family is going to be worried about is your web history. I know that's a consideration. So,
can I ask you a question?
Yes, of course, please.
We have a personal experience. You and I used Derek in the past, and I had
not when he was dead. So that's.
I had an experience where I don't know how you protect yourself from this, but when you're using a computer, a laptop, a phone, what have you, sometimes information might get downloaded. Your data might get downloaded that you had no idea it was downloaded, and it could be something that you had no idea that you don't want anybody else to know.
Like location or?
Well, yeah, there's a lot of it. Again, what we're talking, there's a difference between me as an investigator investigating a third party and what I can do. Like, for example, here's a good trick. Let's say I'm trying to figure you out. Well, bad example.
That is a bad example.
Well, I want this to be a realistic possibility. Let's say I'm trying to figure out Jane here, right? And I don't have any access to any of her electronic footprint. Maybe it's a criminal case, a fraud case. Maybe we think she's embezzling, right? And we're trying to conduct an investigation, and we don't have access to electronic data. One of the coolest tricks that we have, if you want to find out what somebody's up to, and lawyers are involved, we will subpoena the Apple iTunes Store, or we will subpoena the Google Play Store to get a list of your installed apps. And that's where the Tinder, Grindr, Viber, whatever, the Robinhood, all the financial apps, the Bitcoin apps, the Coinbases, that's how I can get an idea of what you're up to before I even get to the point where I can get data. So again, what I can do as an investigator as a third party and what I can crack into versus I've got family, I've got law enforcement, I've even got the courts trying to tell me do whatever you can, that's a different situation. So,
quick question. I think I already know what to do by saying this, but you see this on movies and TV shows where they use Face ID to unlock a phone when someone's passed away. It's probably not practical because.
Well, I'm glad you asked me that because I forgot to mention it, because that's one of the really interesting things about biometrics. Now, we've all heard the story about the dead guy phone's finger swipe, right? We've all heard that. We're all familiar with that. That actually used to be a thing. I actually had a case a long time ago where we thought the guy's wife was screwing around. He actually She passed out drunk. He finger swiped the phone. He opened the phone, was able to do an iTunes backup of the phone, and in that we found the text messages where she was putting drugs in his food to make him pass out so she could sneak out to see a boyfriend. Okay.
What a plan.
Actually, well, it did work, okay? But Apple started making changes to it. One of the changes is now, if you use biometrics to open your phone, you still have to have the password if you connect it to any electronic device, right? Which is why it's important you remember your passcode, even if you're always finger swiping. Yep.
My question is, and first of all, thank you for very insightful. You don't think about these things. As ChatGPT is coming up, and other personal AI like personalized AI and RPA, this are starting to become more personally available.
Mm-hmm.
How do you plan to kind of scale to use that for your investigation or what have you?
Wow, that is a whole really cool separate class. There's a lot of ups, and we're basically talking about leveraging, the new technology and stuff like that. I would say without going down a huge rabbit hole, because that's a great question, one of the things AI can help me do is prioritize passcodes and lock codes and helping me to understand what the most likely passcodes are and the most likely PIN codes are to triage that. Because when we're talking about brute forcing the phones, the good news is you don't start with 0001. You start with the 11111s and the dates and things like that. To finish the question that you'd asked about the biometrics, some of the changes you guys are aware of and may not know that's why it does that. For example, if you don't unlock your phone for, say, 24 hours, it requires a passcode. It requires a passcode upon restart, things like that. So you got to make sure you remember that. And some of that Apple has put in there and Samsung has put in there because of the old dead guy finger urban legend. So it used to be a thing. It's not a thing anymore. The whole, we've all seen like the tape on the fingerprint opening the door, the face in front of the picture. And it drives me crazy because I'm like, don't you think the people who design fingerprint readers see these TV shows too? They know. They're people like us who know people are going to try that and try to make it different. So, had a lady who left the company, huge, big business dispute, multi-millions of dollars in Chicago. She turned her phone back in. She refused to give the passcode to the phone. We ended up having to brute force it. That's the one that took 8 months. She swore she couldn't remember her passcode. She had a doctorate in statistics and couldn't remember a 6-digit code she'd used for 2 years. Anyway, moving on. For all which over that. And I know we don't have much time left, but here's the part that I'm rewarding you with because you had to go through the other part. These are some pictures of mine. These are some old relatives, years and years old. That's my great-great-grandfather. The little bitty guy is my father. My grandfather had him when he was in his late 70s, like they did in the South. These are my Native American ancestors who, when they were little kids, did the whole Trail of Tears walk and stuff like that. So These are some photos of mine. We all have stuff like that. So in my house right now, I have boxes of photos, right? Like we all do. Some going back 100 years. My kids are going to have to go through them, clean them out, keep them, whatever. But what's interesting is I've got all these photos going back 100 years, but very few from the last 20 years, right? It's all digital. We're all keeping it digital, right? And the problem is, so now we've got these pictures. You've got your whole kids. Well, let's go back and look at these people. Could you imagine for a second what it would be like to look at these people's lives in full HD video? To go back and see these pictures and hear their voices and watch him walk down the street in full color HD, right? Wouldn't that be amazing? Our kids are going to be able to do that. Their kids are going to be able to do that. I'm kind of so jealous, I've got I played college basketball. I've got a couple of grainy VHSs from my games, and kids today, every game they've ever played is on YouTube, right? So we may not think it's important, but it's going to be important for them, and we need to make sure we're taking the steps to preserve them. Here's another interesting thing. For example, I have have a newspaper from Pearl Harbor. Okay, not that old. I have one from the Moon landing when I was like a year old. Apart from when your favorite sports team won and you ran out and got a newspaper, and the snowpocalypse in Raleigh, kind of what was one of the last times where people went and grabbed newspapers, and when do you think, or faster, but when do you think that we kind of transition, when was the transition from newspaper to getting our news online? When did that happen?
Late 90s, 2000s.
There's a specific event, a specific 9/11. And you're all familiar with the Wayback Machine where you can go back and look at all websites. Go back and look at your favorite site, News and Observer. Look at REL, any of those sites. Look at them before 9/11, and then go about 6 months after 9/11 and look at how much money they're putting in media. And why? Because 9/11 was one of those things where the events were unfolding so quickly that newspapers couldn't keep up. Everybody rushed to the computers. Fledgling CNN.com, all this stuff is where people started getting their data. So it all switched to digital, right? Kind of corresponded with the fact that people then weren't keeping newspapers anymore. And how do we know, again, how do we know about things that happened in the past? We know from the letters people wrote and kept. We know from the old newspaper clippings and stuff. And we're not keeping those the same way. We're keeping the digital. It's not to say that digital is bad, but it has its downside. So here's going to be the fun part. So let's say you want to store data long term. And again, I love you guys because this is a great group to be talking about this. So what would be some options for the best long-term storage? Now the first thing is VHS, okay? If you got stuff on VHS tapes, you should have digitized that yesterday. There is no excuse. You can put them on a box, send them to places, get them, because they're designed to be stored upright like books. And when they lay on their side, like when everybody throws them in the box, the tape deteriorates and stuff like that. So if you have VHS tapes, no excuse, get them digitized. There's, like I said, it's cheap, throw them in a box, send them off, they'll digitize them. All right, so if you pick that, you're wrong. Okay, that's not the right one.
It's on my Betamax. What are you talking about?
Exactly. A far superior plan. Let's talk about CDs, right? Okay. The good news is, all of those CDs that you have from the 80s when music was at its peak are still good. Okay, I really expected a better response from that. When music was at its peak in the 80s, all right. The CDs are not really considered to be a long-term storage either. The ones you bought will last longer than the ones you burned yourself. We're not even going to talk about cassettes, but the mixtapes that you made on CD from the 80s, if they're not part of your iTunes or your Spotify, you want to digitize those. So CDs are not really a good long-term solution either. They can also be fairly fragile. There are CDs out there that cost like $1,000 a piece or hundreds of dollars a piece, and they're designed for 1,000-year lifespan, supposedly. Right? That's still not the best option. I don't have to explain what this is. This is great. Right? This is LTO tape. Not a good option for personal storage. Not the greatest option for really long-term storage. Why you wouldn't use some type of tape for personal storage is also because the complexity of somebody 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20 years from now trying to access the data. They got to have the right kind of tape drive. Heaven forbid you put encryption on there. It uses a special kind of software. Also a bad idea. Flash drives. Again, all of you guys. Horrible way to store data. Great for moving data back and forth, but SSD drives, flash drives, they are not good for long-term storage. If they die, there's no data recovery. You guys all know that thing about how computer chips continue to grow after you made the circuit boards, and eventually it's like a built-in obsolescence. Flash drives, those kind of drives are not good. That leaves one last thing. Believe it or not, your good old-fashioned platter drives, if you're talking about how can I store data in the safe, all the kids' pictures, the $60 2 or 3 terabyte Amazon hard drive is your best option. Why? Because of the way it stores the data on the platters. I will guarantee you even 50 years from now, 100 years from now, if that drive didn't spin up, Those plates get pulled out, get dropped in another, and I've done enough data recovery. That's your best option, but no encryption. Store the file. If they're JPEGs, put them on there as JPEGs. You know, whatever the native format is that it was recorded in, don't get fancy. Don't try to make a zip file. Don't format it in some weird off-the-wall format. You know, keep it simple so that the data storage is there. Now, what I do, what you can do, you know, every year, these things are cheap. Just back them up, label it, put it in the safe, put in your will or something. Hey, by the way, all the family pictures in a hard drive in the safe. You know, give a copy to grandma and grandpa to put in their safe deposit box when you're talking about your kids' pictures and stuff, the graduations, birthdays, all that stuff. Don't stick a label on it because that'll peel off right onto a paint pen. Again, we're talking about, we want this hard drive to be in that box with all those old pictures and still be there and still be valid. All right, so here's a cool question for you. If you had to come up with a way to store data, and you wanted to store it not for 1,000 years, 10,000 years, 100,000, you wanted a way to store something so that a civilization that came behind us would be able to access the data, but yet you could also store it in something compact. Any ideas? Throw it out there. No wrong answers. Well, there probably are, but any ideas? How would you do it?
iCloud.
Yeah, well, funny you should say that. We're going to talk about iCloud in a second. But researching and stuff, one of the things they came up with that is amazing to me is it harkens back to the old microfiche and microfilm stuff. When they used to take, what you do is you take a picture of a document and you shrink it down to microfilm. And you have those old microfilm readers in the library where you look at stuff like, or on TV shows where they're looking at the old newspapers. But you can take silicone cubes and you can laser etch documents into those cubes. And you can store tens of thousands of documents on these cubes. And the only thing the next civilization needs is to be able to have a microscope. And you make a microscope with a drop of water in the thing. So that's one of the things they're looking at, is just shrinking it down to where any future civilization, you know, the Constitution, Declaration of Independence, those kind of things, putting them on a cube, you can read them with a microscope. Isn't that amazing? Again.
One thing I want to add to that, the previous slide, you can get these RAID jukeboxes like Synology and all. Would those be good?
You guys are going to run me out of the building. I am so glad people stopped using RAID. I mean, I'm glad it's going by the wayside. Yeah, we've got a 20 RAID drive array from 2005 that we're trying to reconstruct right now. This is a great segue. Yep.
20, like
we're going to wrap up
wrapping
now.
up.
So, best practices for data storage. We kind of already talked about this. This is why I don't want you using RAID. Keep it simple, because realize whoever is going to access this, and again, we're talking about your family's pictures, your kids, you know, preschool play and stuff like that. We want their grandkids to be able to access this stuff. Keep it simple, no encryption, standard file formats. Don't use backup software because maybe they can't find it. No passwords, just put it on there. Label, store in a dry and climate controlled place, of course, and make more copies. There's no excuse for not having lots of copies of this data, right? Thinking about the future, getting multiple copies. Don't put your faith in cloud storage for two reasons. One, somebody dies, the bill doesn't get paid, the stuff is gone. Plus, I don't have to explain the mega.com issue where everybody had their stuff stored in Kim.com's mega platform. FBI came in and seized all their servers. There were a lot of people who were doing illegal stuff, but a lot of regular people and small businesses were using it, and all that stuff went away. Again, finally, to wrap up what we've talked about today, move quickly. ISPs aren't going to help you. The phone and the email account are important. If you're going through stuff, remember, you're trying to find financial information. You're trying to find the stuff the family will need to continue. You're also trying to make sure you're storing your stuff in a way that they can continue. Have a plan. Talk to your family. And here's the main takeaway, and that is this. That digital picture on your phone, treat it with the same reverence as that picture from 100 years ago, right? And here's one last thing I'll leave you with. If you've got these photo albums, right? Photo scanners are cheap. They're easy. But if you're too lazy to take them out and scan them and put them back, You have an amazing camera on your phone. Just take a picture of each page. So you at least have it. And that's not just for death, that's fires, floods. I deal with a lot of times with people who've gone through those kind of things and trying to reconstruct their footprint. So, and I think that's it. Question or two before we get out of here. So I know we're over time, but any questions? Again,
Yeah.
Yes.
So just think about recovering your email accounts.
Mhm.
So I have, like you said, multiple Google accounts, and I try to, have one that is a recovery. When you try to add someone else to that, right? Now, it does two contradictory things.
You do need to have their permission, yes. So like, hey, you're about to get an email, I'm adding you as my recovery, and they'll probably go, oh crap, that's a good idea, I'm gonna add you, and then you can say, man, I was in this talk, the guy was a little bit nutty, but he scared me on some things. Again, or like if you add a recovery phone number, you're gonna have to go through the code thing. You guys can handle it. I mean, this is what you do. So,
but then if someone breaks into that other person's Gmail, then they can also get into yours.
No. Well, because they would still have to go to your account. They would still have to do that. Plus, we're still hoping that we're talking about two-step authentication. Again, if you don't trust the phone, the email address or crossing the email addresses, use the phone number. But just remember, you can have more than one phone number. And that's the problem, is how many times have you seen where somebody changes phone numbers or they lose that phone number and then they don't realize the law of unintended consequences of what happens when you change your phone number? You think, oh, I just got to tell everybody I got a new phone number. You're like, oh my gosh, I'm totally screwed because of all the other things that were tied to it. So, so think about that. Yes, sir.
I just have one feedback as far as back of those.
Yes.
Like, this is personal experience. All they have a redundancy plan to back up and restore union.
Obviously, different mediums are great, okay? And when we're talking about backups, we're talking about the idea of maybe a rolling backup. So if you lose everything today you got yesterday. We're also talking about backup plans where I'm going to put it on a medium and it might not get touched for 20 or 30 years. And in that case, that's where I think there's still nothing better than the platter drives, because there's still going to be some old guy in a computer shop somewhere, even if the world has moved on and we're all transmitting stuff in our brains or whatever. Everybody gets the chip, and let's face it, when they offer the chip in your head, you're going to take it. I know you guys. But there'll be a way to fix those drives. So that's kind of the best after looking at all the options. And bang for your buck, $100 for like a 5 terabyte drive. There's no excuse.
Either in actuality in your own life or the advice you give someone else. I'm not saying you always go to. How regularly do you back up your stuff?
Well, the good news is a lot, because I basically live in a forensic lab. I have a huge forensic lab in my house, and I have a technician who is responsible for backing stuff up. I do use Dropbox, but for me, hard drives are dirt cheap. I got stacks of them, and it's actually funny because I have my technician, he's 30, and he kind of looks at the world a different way, and so we back up our very important data, and we work with, like, one time I checked, we had like half a petabyte of storage. I have Seagate 8 terabyte external drives that we stored. I've got 200 of those, and we've also got LTA tape. But my point is, I like to put cases on hard drives, store those hard drives in huge gun safes, and he likes a network NAS with a bunch of rated drives where, it's 60 to 100 terabytes and it automatically mirrors across the network. And the only way we can work in the office together and get along is if we do both. I get to do it my way, he gets to do it his way. So, anyway.
See who's right as later on.
I should live that way.
Well, you won't, he might.
Exactly. Oh, all right. Last thing to leave you on, floppy disks. How many copies did you need of a floppy disk? How many? Where's my old school guys here? If you were storing on a floppy disk, how many copies?
Used to work, but they used to go back, so.
You needed, the protocol was you needed 3 copies.
Yeah.
One, you put it in there, oh, the disk is bad. You put the second one in, oh, the drive is bad. The third one, you wait until you know you've got a working drive to put it in there. So 3 copies for floppy drive. So me asking you to make one copy on a hard drive, that's not too much. So thank you guys so much. Absolutely, enjoyed it. I'll see you in 4 or 5 years, I guess. We'll see how the advice play out, right?
I'm only having a few people
Hopefully I will.
Please don't let it come out and grab it all like lemon corner and everything.